Okay, so the poem that we're concentrating on this time is called "Oh, What Is the Sound Which So Thrills the Ear," which seems like a fairly positive start. But as we know from studying a lot of Auden's poetry, that often he uses irony and parody to sort of challenge the reader. And on the basis of the topic of his poetry, it's probably pretty obvious that he's doing that here. So when we see the line, the title sort of starts with that same first line, and we see there's a bit of naivety in terms of what the reality of war is, and this poem is essentially focused on war. It doesn't say which war, and it doesn't sort of give too many details, so that it can be taken in a more universal manner. So when we see that, there is one reference to some uniforms in the first stanza here, the Scarlet Soldiers, which sort of gives the idea of an old sort of fashioned English army outfit. But outside of that, there's no real indication of time or era or what war that they're Auden's referring to. Then, then the end of this sort of question is down in the valley, drumming, drumming, and we've got the idea of down in the valley, and the language there actually gives the sense of us dropping into this valley, and the drumming, drumming, sort of the repetition brings it up, creates this rhythm. And the question is, like, oh, it's sort of like exciting. Like, what are they doing? Sort of there's some noise and there's some a group of these soldiers together, and it's sort of like a bit exciting. Then the answer comes. So the structure of this particular poem is that the first two lines of each stanza are one voice or one persona, and then the second two lines are another persona. So the question's asked by the first persona: what is the sound which so thrills the ear down in the valley, drumming, drumming? And the answer is only the scarlet soldiers, dear, the soldiers coming. So if we just look at the note there, that this sort of alternating of the two voices is called antiphony, which basically gives the idea of these two personas, but there's not a lot of information given. I'm going to make some assumptions based on having read the whole poem, that the first two lines are a wife and the second two lines are a husband. So when the husband says only the scarlet soldiers, dear, he's, an affectionate term he calls his wife, the soldiers coming. And then she says, oh, what is that light I see flashing so clear over the distance, brightly, brightly? And the light flashing could indicate, guns, bombs, explosions, things that might not be so good. But there's the flashing sort of sense again, a bit like the thrill is quite exciting. And then this flashing is coming over the distance, and it's brightly, brightly. So we've got the repetition and the question again. But it seems to me like over the distance, down in the valley, that the soldiers are far enough away not to worry about. So it's not a major concern for this couple in their home. Now, when we think about this couple in their home, I want us to think about them as a representative of the public and of the people. So I don't want us to think of them as literally two people in a house waiting for soldiers to come, because that doesn't really make a lot of sense. War is generally waged on battlefields, not in houses. But it's like, to me, Auden is trying to metaphorically suggest that the soldiers are coming into their lives. And so the metaphor to me is that these two people, this man and this woman, represent the people, okay, and the people's ideas about war. So the answer again, from the husband here is only the sun on their weapons. Again, quite a nice, um, a nice sort of image. The sun sort of beaming down and sort of reflecting off the weapons. But it's a strange juxtaposition, because sun obviously is a life giving force, and obviously weapons are a destructive force. So this juxtaposition between those two things creates a level of irony in the answer, that we think that war is okay because it's far away from us. But the reality is we aren't that ignorant, so that we actually do know what war is and what weapons do. But if it's away from us, we can sort of ignore it and say it's okay. And then the idea they step lightly. And it's like, well, soldiers don't tend to step lightly, and they certainly tend to have quite a big impact, but lightly suggests that they're not actually impacting much at all. So again, a very interesting image, and it's actually sort of juxtaposed to a line right at the end of the poem where the word heavy is used. So lightly and heavy obviously are contrasted, and it's like maybe this persona, this husband, he knows a little bit more, but he's willing to be ignorant because it's not in his backyard. It's not like affecting him personally. Then we get the next question from the wife. What are they doing with all that gear? And the word "all" like really suggests that they've got a lot of gear and that it's overwhelming. What are they doing this morning? This morning, and I feel like this morning gives us a greater sense of, hey, this is happening now. So there's a bit of urgency now. They've gone from over the distance and down the valley, and what are they doing right now this morning? And the husband's response is only their usual maneuvers. Again, the word usual feels familiar, feels like it's not out of the ordinary. Um, and, he says perhaps a warning. But the idea of the word perhaps there is like, that's not as definitive as what he was saying before, where he was quite certain that they were doing certain things. Perhaps he suggests that there's a lack of certainty there. So when we get this starter sense, we're seeing that the husband's perhaps becoming less confident in his understanding and knowledge. So he sort of knows what's going on, and he's trying to, calm his wife. But now he's starting to be a little bit more understanding that there's something going on. Then they, the wife says, "Oh, why?" Okay, so the word "why" creates a sense of desperation. It's repeated at the start of the next line. Why have they left the road down there? Again, they're now doing something that maybe isn't usual, something they haven't seen before. So they're leaving the road, and I guess on the road it feels like they were sort of safe and the soldiers were distant from them, but now they're not doing that. Again, that sense of why are they suddenly wheeling? Like why are they changing direction? So this repetition sort of gives us the idea that this body of this mass of people, of all these soldiers together, are turning, and they're turning in a direction that this couple have never seen before. And then again, this less confident language is used by the husband, perhaps a change in their orders. Again, like if he understands orders and he understands that they sometimes change, again, it shows a sense of understanding in the husband that he's got some sense of what's going on. And then he sort of says to his wife, "Why are you kneeling?" Now, to me, it suggests that the first persona, that the wife is praying, and that she's starting to realise there may be some sort of impending danger here, and that she needs to say a prayer. But she's not certain. There's no certainty in what's happening here. There's just the sense that maybe things are starting to go wrong. Now, to me, there's a commentary, obviously, by Auden suggesting that, if there's even the glimmer of an understanding of this, why does this couple just sit in their house when they know the danger is coming? They understand what is going on, and metaphorically, we do. We understand what war means. We understand what happens in war. Yet we're happy to sort of sit and be ignorant of it and say that we don't understand, we don't know what's happening, even though we probably, quite literally do know what's happening. So then we go to the next one. Oh, haven't they stopped for the doctor's care? Haven't they reined their horses? Their horses. So we've got the idea of the doctor's care that the wife does understand that there's carnage in war, that they might need help from a doctor, particularly if they've been injured. And then she's like almost wishing or desiring, haven't they reined their horses, which would show that they're finished, or that they're stopping, not continuing on. But the reality is, it's like she knows that they're not reining their horses, but she almost wishes they were, so that they would stop coming and stop sort of moving towards where they live and creating this danger for them. Then we go back to the answer, why they are none of them wounded, dear. So none of these men are actually injured, none of the forces. And this real hyperbole of none, to me, it's deceiving. We know that men die in war. We know that that's a true reality of war, but it's like the persona here that the husband's trying to ignore the reality of what he does understand. So again, it shows the people's reluctance to admit what they know is happening, and what their government and what their leaders are sort of, ensuring other young men are doing. They just don't want to know about it. Then we've got the next question from the wife. Is it the parson they want with white hair? Is it the parson? Is it? Is it? So the parson obviously being like a religious figure. And the husband's response is, no, they are passing his gateway, dear, without a visit. And to me, I interpreted this as the idea that the soldiers don't go and see the parson because they know that what they're about to do is not something of faith and religion. They're going to do some things that probably we would have to respectfully say are evil. So they're not celebrating that idea. They're simply sort of saying, well, I wish I didn't have to, but I'm not certainly not going to go and see the priest and ask for anything because I'm about to go and do something pretty bad. Then they continue to come forward, and the wife basically asks, "Oh, it must be the farmer who lives so near. It must be the farmer, so cunning, so cunning." So she's looking around and looking, what couldn't be me? Couldn't be me that they're coming for. Couldn't be my husband. Must be someone else. So the wife at this stage is hoping the soldiers will go to the farmer, who she believes is quite cunning and may be a better target for them. And then the husband's response is, "They have passed the farmyard already, dear, and now they are running." So there's a proximity now. They're past the farmyard, closer to where this couple live, and the pace of the soldiers has really changed. It's sort of stepped up. So then we go into the second last stanza, and it's the last stanza where these two persona, the husband and wife speak. So the wife sort of says, "Oh, where are you going? Stay with me here. Were the vows you swore deceiving? Deceiving?" And then she starts to realize that it's not the farmer who's cunning, or the father who's the farmer, from the previous stanza, who she should be worried about. It's her own husband. So when she asks that question, the husband's, fear has overtaken his decisions, and he's not hanging around. And then she sort of says, "But we've got vows, and those vows are a real contract, a real sense of devotion." And she's just totally can't understand why he would deceive her like this, and why he might leave right now in this most terrible time. And it sort of goes to show that we can willingly sort of bury our head in the sands about ideas of what's happening in the world, but when push comes to shove and we're placed in a sort of pressure situation, very often we will flee that situation. So instead of standing up and saying, "Oh, we should stop," or "It's not right," we just run away, and that's somewhat cowardly. And I think that the way that it's presented with this couple, that it actually does come across as being quite cowardly. So his answer is no. "I promise to love you, dear." So he knows what he promised. He understands his commitment, under the eyes of God and under the eyes of the church. But his response is, "I must be leaving." And the hyperbole, or the high modality language, indicates that in his head, he's got no choice. He's got to run. He's got to get away. There's nothing for him to stay for. And then when it goes on to say, "Oh, it's broken the lock and splintered the door," we're no longer having two people talk. We've got like a bit of a third person sort of observation of what's happening. And it's broken the lock. It represents the soldiers, the army, and the broken lock obviously could be just the door that they're opening to get in to find these two people. But to me, that the lock is a contract that is being destroyed, and in some ways, breaking that lock breaks their marriage, destroys the bond that they had, the marital bond. But it's also like the lock is broken because they were ignorant. Their vulnerability is exposed because they didn't rise up as the people and say this is wrong, and the lock is broken, breaking that contract, breaking whatever conventions or understandings of the world that they believe there should be. It's broken here because of the fact that they didn't turn up and didn't sort of show any interest in what was happening in their world. That they're really rendered right now. They've got to experience it, whether they like it or not. And the fact that the door is splintered, it's sort of just there's a fracture here, a fragmented society, and this all results from our ability to sort of vaguely know what is happening and write a different narrative to that particular story. Then it's the gate, and they're turning. Their boots are heavy on the floor. So they're inside the house now, and the boots are heavy, like I said, juxtaposed to the lightly earlier in the poem, confirming the perception that he had that they stepped lightly at the start is very different to the reality. And he probably knew that. He was probably trying to be nice about it, but like when it was in the distance, it wasn't a real concern to them. But now that it's on their doorstep and inside their house, everything's very different. And then the last bit, their eyes are burning, and these are the soldiers now. It indicates a real aggression, a real violence in the manner in which they carry out their duties. And it gives a sense almost of that robotic nature, that they're not thinking, they don't have the ability to do that. They follow orders, they do what they're told, but they do that with a little bit of violence and aggression. So to me, it seems like, obviously, to me, the poem is totally ridiculous in the nature that an army would go and find a married couple that are staying, obviously, in what maybe might be like a countryside area if they've got a farmer living next to them. Um, but it's an important setting that Auden uses because it represents that whilst we think we're isolated and we think we're away from the political manoeuvrings and the decisions made by our governments and our leaders, that even if we are in a remote area, it really does come into our house, whether we like it or not. We can't ignore what is happening in our world because it will come and invade us. And it won't necessarily literally invade us like these soldiers are coming in, but it invades us in a lot of different ways because let's say, and this is hypothetical, but let's say this family or this husband and wife had a child. Well, that child could be sent to war, and that's the reality where it will come and it will come to you and it will reach into your life and it will impact you too. And if you have never had a say or never put your hand up to protest or say this is wrong, then you're going to have to sort of basically pay the consequence of your ignorance. So when we get to the end here, my overall comment is that it's quite a universal poem, so it doesn't specifically refer to any sort of war. It's from what I can gather in my research, written in around the 1930s, 1932. So it's at the start of fascism, the Great Depression's happening. There's some political tendencies in the world that are scary, and we probably know they're scary. We probably know that they're coming, things like the Nazi Party and Mussolini in Italy, and even Stalin in Russia. Sort of growing up in the Russian revolutions of 1917, uh, we start to see that the world has shifted in the 1930s, and we know it's happening, but we are willing to turn a blind eye to it. I think I mentioned, Neville Chamberlain's appeasement policy, when he was the British leader just prior to World War II, and that hasn't even happened yet. It's around this time that Auden's writing this poem that Chamberlain does say, "I will appease Hitler." So we get this real strong sense that Auden sees this already. He sees that if you just basically want to ignore what is happening in front of you, then leaders, dictators, tyrants, as he's written in other poems, they will overtake. They will cause destruction and do whatever they want. And you've got to stand up to that. And that's not just the people. That's everybody. The people as part of the political system have to stand up and say, that's we can't have that. So when you look at the two personas, we see that there is an ignorance at times. Sometimes there's a bit of knowledge, but that knowledge is ignored. And like I said here, sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes it's a reluctance to accept. But they're both guilty because they don't engage, and this then will come back to have an impact. So when we finish right at the end of the poem in the last stanza, we're really left with this ultimate betrayal, as the husband basically leaves, and the couple disintegrates. And to me, the couple is a microcosm of society that we sort of talk in riddles, and we don't really admit to each other what is happening, even if we know what is happening. And in the end, it cripples our society, and it fractures us and separates us. So I think that this poem's got a lot more in it than just like this simple sort of idea of this man and wife. I think it represents a great deal more in terms of what Auden is trying to say about the nature of war and the nature of people and their reaction to war.